Was the government right to reject an inquiry into the Battle of Orgreave?
This was the decision this week, that there were ultimately no deaths or wrongful convictions, so the Home Secretary said there was not sufficient basis for an inquiry. Lisa Nandy.
No, they weren't. They were absolutely wrong to do it, and they were wrong for a number of reasons. They were wrong, firstly, because the people who were affected by what happened at the Battle of Orgreave have lived with that for the rest of their lives. Many of them, they've seen it seriously harm or kill their career prospects. They've seen real damage to their health and their mental health and to their families and to their communities and to their lives. And we've had a series of revelations over the last few years, starting with a BBC documentary and an investigation by the IPCC, when South Yorkshire Police self-referred themselves for that investigation, which found serious evidence of corruption and wrongdoing in that police force. And you can't say for certain whether Hillsborough would never have happened had that been properly investigated at the time, but those links must be explored and we must learn lessons for the future. And the government hasn't just rejected calls for an inquiry into the Battle of Orgreave. What Theresa May has done is she has dropped heavy hints that she was going to hold an inquiry into the Battle of Orgreave. Her own Chief of Staff just a few months ago wrote a piece arguing strongly that the government should do it. There were briefings to the newspapers that it was going to happen. There were commitments given in meetings between the Home Secretary and campaigners, and then suddenly we had this statement to the House of Commons just a few days ago telling people that all of that promise had been broken, and that is utterly unforgivable.
Yeah. There were years of Labour government. Why didn't the Labour government investigate? I mean, Orgreave is back in 1984.
Well,
13 years.
I'll tell you why, because the papers were released under the 30-year rule in 2012, by which point we'd been out of office for 2 full years. The IPCC investigation then took another further 2 years, and that was when the Orgreave campaign was set up. And that's when the calls for an inquiry were made to the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. And quite simply, we weren't in power.
OK. Sajid Javid.
I think, clearly, look, it's a very serious, sensitive issue, and that's why the Home Secretary was right to meet with everyone involved, those calling for an inquiry and others, and weigh up all the evidence, everything that was being put in front of her, and that's exactly what she did. But she reached the right conclusion, because her job is to decide what's in the public interest. And what she had to weigh up is also not just what happened then at the time, but also what has happened since then. Decades have passed, and when it comes to policing, there's been some significant changes in how we police our country, significant improvements, how we carry out prosecutions. We've got an independent prosecution service. We've got an independent body that investigates any complaints against the police anywhere in the country. We've got now even police and crime commissioners directly elected. So a lot has changed about how we police ourselves.
It was only a few months ago that Theresa May's Chief of Staff said if we want to make sure the police are above corruption, collusion and cover-ups, we need to investigate cases like this, despite everything you say.
I don't think that point is fair, because when he wrote about this, he wasn't her Chief of Staff, and I don't think it's fair to sort of say he believes that as her...
So you stop believing it now?
No, he's not the decision maker. The decision maker are the ministers. The Chief of Staff's job is to do what the Prime Minister says. Okay. And the decision here is clear, and I think it was a difficult decision for the Home Secretary. She made that clear in her statement in Parliament, but when she balanced everything out, I think she absolutely came to the right decision.
All right, you, sir.
Thank you.
Hold on. We're here for you.
I mean, it's interesting what you say. Are you sure it's less to do with what was in the public interest, and more to do what's within the interest of the Conservative Party?
You're down here. Yes. Rubbish. Oh, you have to say it again. The microphone's only just reached you.
Probably just as well. Yeah. You say decades have passed. Yes, decades have passed from Hillsborough. So how can it not be the right thing to do to look back at what's affected people's lives, their health, their jobs, their lives? Nobody died, thank goodness. But to say that decades have passed and it doesn't matter anymore is an absolute outrage.
Well, I agree with the lady. I think throughout our history in popular political science, and I think you pretty much said the truth there. It seems that working class people do not really get a fair shake. If this was something that did not have to do, if it had to do with Etonians having a little party and got out of hand, I'm sure we would have had everything we needed to know about it. And that's the problem. I think that's the problem that people feel frustrated about in this country. You know, I have young children, and they're going to grow up in this country, and I don't want them to have a bickering government. I don't want them going back and forth on who's important and who's not. You know, we're all important, and I think in the backs of our minds we all know this. And I think in the front of our minds we forget it. And I think that's the problem. We have to think a little bit more as we are all in the same boat together, rather than you are on that side of the aisle and I'm on this side.
So you think that there should have been an inquiry? And you, sir, what do you think?
I think that Maggie Thatcher's government was covering up at the time, and the government now is still covering up for Margaret Thatcher.
Okay. Do you want to speak? Or you keep shaking your head. No, you don't. Right. Zani.
I agree. I think the bright light of transparency is good, and I find it hard to follow the logic that says not having a public inquiry is in the public interest. I think that it is. You can argue and you can debate and you can think about what the right remit for the public inquiry is, and we have had experience in public inquiries that have had too broad a remit, that have gone on for too long, that haven't been done well. But a well thought out, scoped public inquiry seems to me to be incontrovertibly part of coming to terms with something.
Despite the cost, is the cost. People keep citing the cost of Chilcot at 13 million.
And
Leveson at 5 million. This is money, you keep spending money on
price
these
justice?
What do you say? Who said that? You? Yes. Yeah, go on.
Cheap.
And what do you think about this issue?
It should go ahead, as you said.
Okay.
Thank you.
Charlie Wolf.
Sometimes spending a couple bucks is actually the good thing.
Exactly.
Charlie Wolf.
In 1984, I first arrived in the country and I was on a boat spinning records, so it makes it kind of hard for me to talk about the incident in particular. But I also believe that, yes, you know, the bright lights of transparency, the truth, you know, shall prevail. I believe in that. But I think it also needs to be tempered with, there are times I've seen some investigations. I think Chilcot, it was a waste of time, quite frankly, as far as I was concerned.
Okay.
But I just wanted to finish by saying there are times when I think you look at, for instance, some of the inquiries that are happening or they want to happen in Northern Ireland where it's putting soldiers' lives at risk. You know, that sometimes is something that doesn't get noticed to the extent it should do.
You said the back in blue.
Norman Tebbit commented that the inquiry could have been used as a stick to beat the Thatcher government. And isn't the real reason that we're not having an inquiry is that the difference between Hillsborough and Orgreave is that that the police were acting at Orgreave as a direct arm of the state.
Right. Have you spoken already? No, you, sir.
The reality is it leads on to all the other manipulations going on by the state. The Shrewsbury strikers, the Liverpool dockers, the whole machinery of the state was used against social protest at that time, and they don't want to draw a line on it because it goes back to the whole of Maggie Thatcher's legacy.
So, Javid, does this give you pause to think?
No, I think what it shows, and quite rightly so, it is a difficult, sensitive issue. There's a lot to weigh up here. But at the end of the day, you know, any minister that's confronted with this, and the Home Secretary certainly was, you have to make a call on what's in the public interest. You can't ignore just simply things like cost, although that shouldn't be the main factor, but they are important parts of the process. But decide if you actually went through with the inquiry, you want to make sure there's actually a good reason to believe there will be lessons learned. But so much has changed about policing.
Lessons learned?
Because so much has changed about policing, how we police in this country. It is radically different to what it was decades ago, and a lot of those lessons have been learned.
She was keen on it before.
A legacy is shredded, and you're trying to keep it alive. Her legacy died and went with Hillsborough inquiry, and you Tories are trying to keep it alive, and that's why the real reason you won't have this inquiry at Orgreave.
And you said...
Yeah. Is it a coincidence that the South Yorkshire Police, who were involved with Hillsborough and Orgreave as well, has this decision been taken in light of the fact that the same force were involved in it?
Exactly.
I think did the South Yorkshire Police want the inquiry, didn't they?
Well, I don't know.
The government
I don't know. I wasn't close enough to the decision, but it's a decision for the government made by the Home Secretary.
Release the papers.